Hello, everyone. Welcome to the sixth episode of the LEX Podcast. I'm very pleased to have on the show today Shuchika Sahay. Shuchika is the global CHRO of Firstsource, an IT-enabled company with presence in 5 countries and about 28,000 employees. I've known Shuchika for a very long time, and I really value the perspective she brings to HR, especially with her developmental perspectives, as well as her passion for some of the things related to employee experience that we are going to delve deeper into. So, welcome on the show, Shuchika. Very excited to have you
Hi,
today.
hi, Nishit. Thank you for having me over, and it's such a pleasure to be in your studio. Yeah, I was going 20 years back to when we first met at campus. So, hi, we are all meeting in different settings now in life.
Yeah, but it's good to see how we have taken separate routes in our
Oh,
individual
we have.
journeys, and then we meet again.
Yes.
Great. So, Shuchika, let's start with your current role and some of the challenges that you would face in your current role. IT enabled services is a very difficult space, and margins are not necessarily very high. Attrition is extremely large in many cases, and this is also an area where HR has a direct opportunity to contribute to the bottom line. So,
Hmm.
what have you been doing in terms of your role? What are the challenges? How have you been trying to overcome some of those?
Thank you for asking that question, Nishit. Let me start from the start, right? Let me just introduce my organization a little bit. Uh, I am part of Firstsource. It's a globally run, globally managed organization. We are an RP Sanjeev Goyanka group company, uh, and we play into a number of industries: BFSI, communication, media, and technology, and healthcare. We're also foraying into some other industries at this point of time, which are really hot. So we are right at the intersection of a very competitive industry, which is hungry for talent. Talent itself is pivoting. And one of the key factors or strategic pillars for us is to grow our lines of businesses, our geographies. So it all creates a very high paced uh, organization which has a very ambitious outlook. And at the same time, the industry and the customer value the client value that you had defined for this industry many years back around arbitrage and about outsourcing work that comes in cheaper has changed because every industry is digitizing, technology is changing just the way we live. So no longer can you do that. So you got to sort of uh, create value for the customer, which is on the back of digital, on the back of technology. So that's another interesting intersection we are facing. And the final one is really, how do you grow your people? How do you give them a sense of the growth? How do they experience culture, which is the whole employee experience, that and many other things. So that's pretty much my role. Most of our clients are in Europe and North America. Our leadership team sits within India, UK, and US. So it all of this put together creates a very interesting role for me. I don't want to talk about challenges. I want to talk about opportunities, Nishit, because that's one thing I've realized. Optimism helps you play this game. And I think one of the biggest challenge, and I took the role only last year, right? So this is also my first enterprise leadership role. So it's not that I come with massive 20 years of been there, done that. I've grown through the ranks in HR after passing out of TISS. And I think what my last 20 years does is gives me a lot of functional competency. But you and I have been in this whole journey long enough to know functional competency is one part of it, and there are many people who have that much better than at least me. I think I think the opportunity is to understand all of what is going around you, make sense, and create some themes and just work on it, right? Just execute them to the core. And that creates the difference between a successful employee value proposition and not a successful one. So opportunities are really, how do you create that employee experience across work, across manager support, across culture, across experience of digitization, so that it all combines to make employees feel that, okay, this is the right choice. Idea is to create long term retention in the organization, both for business continuity and also margin improvement, right? Attrition is a cost drain. So I'm going to pause. I'll let you dissect and ask more sort of incisive questions which you are known for.
So, in terms of the value proposition that you spoke about already, where do you stand in terms of your new or refined employee value proposition? What are the steps you are taking to get there? How do you see it coming out?
So it's, when I came in, for me, it was like one slide in my head, and I'm still true to that slide. I think, but the journey is changing in the way I am approaching that in the organization.
Mhm.
Let's talk last year. Last year, we sort of faced what everybody else faced when the great professor Anthony Claude coined the term the great resignation. I don't know because of him or despite that term, and it was always meant to happen and it happened, or because of that term. I think there were a lot of attrition sort of challenges, not just for us, but everybody else. And I think for me, it was a condition which we were facing
Mhm.
pretty strongly, but it was also to bring out what I thought will make that change, right? and
Mhm.
and to me, great employee experience, great retention comes from two or three things. When you hire people, uh, of course you hire the right talent, but look, everybody's fighting for the same talent, right? It's commoditized and personalized both, but there is that bit. You get your how do you get people through the door, right? How technologically enabled that is. Like, one of the strategic pillars for us is digital first, digital now. What does that mean at all employee touch points? You can't be digital first, digital now, and you can't, like, not have a bot to interact with employees. That's when the rubber hits the road. So have you
Or
invested in that?
worse still, you give paper forms to your candidates to fill out.
Absolutely, absolutely. So look, some things had already been in play before I joined. So the organization had onboarded Talio. They had onboarded aspiring minds for testing experience, primarily during the COVID. So I just accelerated that technology journey. We said we will have an HCM, and that's a journey that's starting. You'll soon see some more news in the marketplace on that. So that's one big differentiator. The second piece is, yeah, you can interact with technology, but these times demand more empathy from the manager. So I think one of the things that I started literally creating evangelist across the organization. Trust me, I didn't have to try too hard. Everybody across the leadership team gets it. Everybody has worked like me through the ranks, been ops managers, been ops leaders before they've taken CXO roles as business heads or operations head or CEO or whatever. So people get it. This is also good news for, got a lot of support from the CFO, because uh, attrition is cost, right? So when we talk about manager capability, I kind of ran 3 miles more and shouted 3 miles more, 3 decibels more, saying, you want attrition fixed, you have to work on manager capability. So I'm still talking to that slide in my head. I've
Mhm.
just changed the order of those things. For me, there are four factors that I talk to you about. How do you make work meaningful itself,
Mhm.
right? And how do you make it very fit for purpose? So you put a person in a manager role, you have to let them do the manager role. They can't be doing uh, sales management, ops management. They can't be doing MIS, and they can't be doing everything else. So that the time left for doing the managerial role is 10%, 20%. It has to be the other way around. And that ecosystem has to be built around that person. So, because the person took on a managerial role because they wanted to lead people. And if you believe in that fundamentally, you'd probably make the work meaningful around them by just removing all the other noise. The second bit is around the support of that manager. I mean, one thing is to want to do the manager role, the other thing is to be capable to do the manager role, and that's where your entire sort of the learning and development, on the job training, one very small part of
Enablement,
it.
the whole
Yeah,
enablement piece. Yeah.
yeah, the whole enablement of that, peer level coaching, learn through case studies, learn through job experiences, reflect, all of that. So you have to kind of create that ecosystem. So those are the I'm still in my head, I'm still talking to that slide, right? But I am upfronting based on business need. Some things are more immediate, some things will happen when the time comes for it, right? So I don't know if that sort of answers your
That
question,
that
Nishit.
that absolutely makes sense. So the interesting thing is, I hear a lot of developmental inputs that you are trying to provide to your managers. Interestingly enough, my approach has always been slightly different, which is to not train them to drive a car, but give them a self-driving car. Because then you kind of standardize a little bit more, you level the playing field a little bit more. But maybe the end kind of best result would be to bring the best of both together, as in give them a self-driving car, but still uh, get them to learn how to drive, so in case something goes wrong, they know how to manage a situation. So yeah, that's excellent, and that kind of provides us an avenue to move into the next part of the discussion, which is the whole thing about experience. So I know you started off talking about experience and how it is an important thing in your organization and in your personal roadmap. Now, when we define employee engagement, employee experience, we typically talk about experience being at the intersection of culture, process, and technology. So, what we say is, for great experience to exist, you must exhibit great culture, great processes, and then eventually technology, which basically is a warning for organizations that don't think technology alone can solve your problems, and a neat interface or an employee experience layer is going to solve all your problems.
Yes.
So, uh, do you follow a specific model of employee experience? How do you define it? How do you want to operationalize it?
Look, first thing first, Nishit, I don't know. Maybe it's because of our alma mater, but I can't remember having a class on employee experience where we sat together.
Never.
But I exactly evangelize the same thing. Culture is the condition that gets created around you to follow the processes that you set to drive whatever uh, outcomes in the organization. And technology is a vehicle, right?
Just a little.
Technology just lets you scale things and gives you result faster. It's almost like one HR person will talk to about 100 people if they are very very driven in 10 days or 15 days. And your Qualtrics survey can do the, and we have Qualtrics institutionalized in the organization. It's a SAP product,
Mhm.
and you can amplify listening at scale pretty quickly through that, right? So to me, technology is just cheaper, faster, that story, right? To me, the most important thing is culture. Uh, and I don't know who was I talking to. I think there was this really interesting learning culture evangelist, consultant in the market. And said a very interesting thing, and I think he's got a book, so it's patented. So I do want to give him that uh, as I speak about this. And he said that culture is just an organism in your organization, and it's an organism, and it's come about because of its own experiences, and it acts to those experiences, and its only job is to self-preserve. And that was so beautiful, right? Culture's only job is to self-preserve. So if you want to change culture, if you want to do something interesting with culture, you got to teach it different behaviors so that culture starts to respond differently to you.
Mhm.
And to me that reflection is such a daily thing. uh, how does work happen in the organization? What comes in the way of it? Is the leadership team an enabler or a barrier? Are we approving things, or are we constantly looking at things that we don't need to approve for work to happen? uh, how many people get into a decision making process? How does a person feel about their empowerment? what is the message, what is the narrative to them about our own success? Are we a glass half empty organization? Are we a glass half full organization around our own uh, rewards and recognition? If I am glass half empty person, as a leader, there is no way I'm going to be able to recognize small wins. So you've got to define who you are as a persona, and you've got to define who do you want to be as a persona of an organization, and then start to put interventions, processes to enable that. Uh, so what are some of the things that we have done on culture? One of the things is really honest conversation around where business is, what are we doing well, what do we need to do more. A lot of evangelizing around our strategy, but it's still not enough, need to do
Mhm.
more. So we're trying to design something at an organization level where we are not directly talking to the top 14, 15 people. Like the CEO is not just talking to his directs, but we are like evangelizing that with a group of 30, 40 people. And that's in the works right now. And how do you sort of make each person very accountable for a couple of these strategic initiatives so that it's getting driven across the organization? So if I were to step away from what we need to change, I think we will make a lot of distinction on how work is getting organized across the organization, how's decision making happening, and who are we evangelizing with. At the end of the day, you've 28,000 people. You've got to sort of activate every level to evangelize to a set of people, and that's what we will do. Couple of other OD things will come in. You'll do your EVP, you will do your leadership development, you will do your, you know, talent management, but I look at them as tools and processes. I don't think a great talent management program is going to drive performance, or a great performance management system is going to drive performance. The conversation that I have with my team member, or the CEO has with me on HR, or business with one of the business guys, is going to define the tenor of how we behave and perform in the organization, if that makes sense to you.
The only thing I'll add here is that when you do the conversations, when you leave it to people, there is a bit of risk in terms of how different people respond to your suggestions. And not everyone does respond in the same or consistent manner. And that's where the approach we've taken is that we'll provide a step-by-step wizard, so that the good line managers already follow the step-by-step wizard. They don't even need our system. They're already doing what we are doing. But most of the managers are not necessarily operating at the same level of capability, and it helps if you guide them through a step by step process and nudge them on what they need to talk about in that discussion. Otherwise, I sometimes joke that that one on one ends up becoming coffee with Karan, and you talk about everything other than what's important. And you've checked the box that you had your one-on-one. So the one-on-one is possibly a very important part of that manager-employee relationship, but unfortunately that's not being used to its fullest potential. And that's where we believe it's possible to kind of streamline the process and also elevate the quality of conversations by giving them a standardized process. You don't need technology. It's more about a process than a technology.
I think you need both, frankly, and I agree with you. Culture is just the intent and the interventions and the actions you will take, and also how will you reward and how will you, you know, I tell all my business leaders that the reward you give to your people is your religion. You can't really mess with your religion beyond a point, right? So if you are going to be soft in rewarding, the person on the other end will take a message that your leadership is soft. If you are very fair in your reward, the person on the other end will take that message. And if you're unfair, they'll take that message. So you cannot say something and do something else. So for me, culture and leadership message consistency is religion for me. And I spend a lot of time in that area in my daily job, because I get that right. I get sort of, we get, as a leadership team, we get that right. We get everything right. So I put that under culture. Process is really important. And I put development a little bit there, Nishit, to your earlier point,
Mhm.
that you give them a self-tested car. and I agree. Uh, and what showed up to me as an analogy was, do you really throw people into the swimming pool? uh, and the good ones anyways swim, right? Bad swimmers like me, after like 7 attempts of learning swimming, I still drown sometimes, right? So it's really important to enable that. Part of that enablement is your wizard, which we used to call process. Before that, I don't know what we called it. I came into the workforce when process was a big deal, right? So now it's all nudge. Now it's all, because people don't like the process language. There is a certain bureaucracy attached to process. I don't believe in it. I think I've seen enough leaders who are so true to the process that they get outcome through the process. So still a believer of that. I think nudge has come. We always nudged, but I think now the nudge has become very sophisticated. I was talking to my inclusion team, my team that drives inclusion, and my team that drives values behavior. We call them reach at Firstsource. I was telling them that, I don't want a 2-hour program on values. People will come forget, and all of us will have difficulty even trying to remember what the values are. But if you're really talking about making values come alive, or making inclusion come alive, it needs to be in the flow of work. That nudging has to be in the flow of work. Like we are having a Zoom conversation. If I get a ticker, and if there were 5 people in this conversation, and if I get a ticker saying, have you checked in with everyone? And I do that, that's empathy at work. If I get a ticker in the middle of this meeting saying, has everybody had a chance to express their thoughts and opinions in this meeting? And if I do that, then that's inclusion. And I'd love to build, I love to use technology to do nudges like this
Yes.
in the flow of work. And that's what I hold against wellness a little bit. I'm still not got my head around it. I'm still thinking, reading, trying to do it. When you think of wellness in the organization, there is just so many stressful Zumba classes and yoga classes going on. Nishit, what I would love to do is really help my managers understand that wellness is something that they distribute across the organization. So how you structure work, how you plan, who you call on weekends, who you don't call on weekends, what's I wish we get a score or indice at some stage in the world where we can say, what is your ability to give stress to people? And can you score that out, and then as a manager, can you work on that and sort of improve that? But of course, that's for a conversation for another day. I'm sure the entrepreneur you are, you will make notes and see if it's
There
good,
are
if it's feasible or not, and come back and tell me that it's not feasible, it's not going to work. So it's
so,
okay.
so there are two things. I'm glad you mentioned about wellness because I say exactly the same thing. There's another thing which I so basically there are two things which I say cannot be a bolt on. One is well-being and the second is analytics. A lot of people
So,
try to kind of believe that because you have Power BI or because you have something, you will get analytics. And I think you will not get analytics. You have to bake that into the design of the program before you
absolutely.
start getting analytics or insights more than analytics. And same thing with well-being. So the yoga class or the meditation session or that whatever music running through the pipe, that's all great, it's all fine, no problem. We had pipe music many years ago in the organization before well-being was even a term that people spoke about.
It's in the
But
elevator.
yeah, but the question is, what kind of culture, what kind of environment are you creating at the workplace? Are you uh, putting people through 7 hours or 7.5 hours of toxic stress and then telling them go meditate for 30 minutes and you'll be fine before you go home? Is that the right approach? So obviously,
I mean, I have gladly worked for people 24 hours. Okay, 24 is a stretch, but I've gladly worked for people 13, 14, 18 hours a day and not felt stressed, because it and I still do it. And it's because there are some leaders who make a safe space for you, who just create a safe space for you, and some don't, right? So even 2 hours in their company, it's like walking on eggshells. So it's just have to you've got to know your power as a leader, your power as a manager, your power as a unit leader, and what you say, what you don't say. So to me, if you say, "What are you doing on culture?" I'm building manager capability and leadership capability brick by brick. I get that right. Everything else falls in place, and you
Absolutely.
need to tell me if I'm being too hopeful, optimistic,
No, I think
oversimplified about it.
so. So when it comes to culture, I tend to follow the 70-20-10 principle, which is you should spend 10% of your time trying to define culture,
Hmm.
20% of the time trying to explain culture or communicate culture, and 70% of the time trying to operationalize culture.
Yeah, and that
Happens
experience for people.
What
Yeah.
happens unfortunately is 70-20-10 in the other sequence. people People end up hiring a consultant, spending a few $100,000, trying to understand and define a fancy culture statement, value proposition, values, whatever it is. Then they spend 20% time trying to communicate through posters and stuff, and then the actual implementation is relegated to 10%, and that's where all of these culture change initiatives prove to be so unsuccessful, because
Yeah.
unless we change the way of doing the day-to-day work, culture is not going to change.
Of
so
course, I agree.
so we've spoken about a few concepts or a few things through the last maybe 10-15 minutes, and I think that's a good way to kind of get into the most important part of this discussion. You spoke about inclusion, you spoke about creating a safe space, and I know that you are a staunch proponent of diversity and inclusion, and you're doing a lot of great work at Firstsource. I think there was a diversity index that you kind of came out in successfully in your first year. So talk to us about what your efforts are towards diversity.
Nishit, in the space of D&I think one thing that I need to start with is that when I joined Firstsource, I think the culture was already great. It was already quite humane, quite uh, there was a lot of respect that I saw in individuals for each other. So you and I would know, being in HR, that it's not possible to sort of get something in 9 months. But I think what happened is we gave a language and we maximized what was happening through our efforts. Uh, we have very good gender representation in our markets like US, and of course that was very important when we applied for this award.
Mhm.
Uh, we also had great representation at leadership level. We sort of formed a DNI studio in the beginning of the year. We had our CEO sponsor the DNI studio. He sits on it. A couple of business heads sit on it. We have a person in US, she runs it, and a person in India who's sort of a diversity expert. So US head of HR and diversity expert sort of runs it. I sit on it from an HR point of view, and we discuss things in the open. We deliberate on everything. That itself is, for that leadership team, a huge experience for all of us, right? Like it's also opened my eyes to how men think about diversity and inclusion, right? These are men who are leaders of the organization, uh, who's what's the approach they want to take. Is it a soft cultural approach? Is it a hard target approach? And both work in different cultures. So that deliberation has been immensely rich.
Mhm.
The rest of the organization sees inclusion being driven from the top. We've not taken a target based approach. I think primarily it's my own inhibition. I think work at culture, everything works. If you work on numbers, you'll show the numbers. Everyone is enough number oriented to show the numbers, but will that stick? Will that fizzle out the moment we lose interest? So want to do keen to do long lasting work. So what have we done? We've done a bunch of things. We didn't have affinity groups, but it's not that women didn't sit together and had coffee together. We've just formalized it. So we have an affinity group for women. We have an affinity group for LGBTQ plus. When we started that, we thought that people will not come out. We've never done this in the organization. There were views for and against it. We just went ahead, did a survey. The response was so overwhelming that we told ourselves, oh my God, were we stupid not to do this? And the question to ask ourselves is just that, right? Uh, who are you to decide for employees? There are enough listening tools. Listen to them, craft something, and that's going to be long lasting, right? Like if I had imposed my worldview on it, probably we would have done it a different way. But we didn't impose my worldview on it. I think we went with the whole point of let's learn from this, let's process this, let's listen from the employees, right? So that's the other affinity group in place. We are setting up some of the other affinity groups as we speak. We have three agendas for this year: ethnicity in US, LGBTQ plus all over, and gender is going to be a very sustained agenda for us. And then that sort of informs a lot of what we do. So we did a women's only batch in India. We actually did military to workplace. So these are army women who we are trying to deploy in our organization at various levels. We are also trying to do something in LGBTQ plus space. All of this also requires a sensitization of the ecosystem, right? You don't want people to come and have bad experience. This is not about going and posting photographs on LinkedIn. This is somebody's life. This is somebody's career. This is somebody's experience. Personally, I feel very responsible of doing things right. So sort of making people understand in different ecosystem what it is to really support a woman. The worst thing you can do is you say support a woman and not support a woman leader, right? Not offer that mentorship. So similarly for LGBTQ plus, it's one thing to say, we are accepting, and then not create condition which is genuinely accepting. So those are things we have done. We've been rewarded well. I did think something will come out of the Bloomberg Gender Equity Index, and I don't know if whether we got indexed or not. Index is not the mainstay, right? We learned so much from the process. We learned how progressive organizations like us should continue to build this journey. What do you put first? What do you put second? What do they look at? So it's a huge learning process for all of us. So yeah, those are some of the things. We are also conscious that we have to build real matrix into recruitment, recruiting women, promoting women, making sure women don't are tried. COVID's not been a great uh, place to be for a lot of primary caregivers, which is traditionally women. So with daycare center support going away in countries like US, a little bit in UK, it's pushed back some efforts, but we are on it. There is also this another aspect of the whole inclusion, which is how do you sort of create a benefit strategy that talks to inclusion.
Mhm.
So we made a number of changes in our maternity benefit in India. We made a number of changes in maternity benefit in US. It's not going to happen in 1 year, right? Nishit, these are very slow journeys because there are enough considerations, but our intention is to do far more in this space than what we have done so far.
I think if you take small steps which are sustainable, that's much better than doing a full blast promotion and then falling short of your promises. And I think that's something that is important. You kind of commit to what you can deliver so that the credibility is built over a period of time, and then people kind of start taking it as a way of life rather than as a mandate coming from management or as HR.
Yeah,
So
in fact, I don't want diversity and inclusion to be a mandate from managers and management or management or whatever the exec committee team that we call it, because people have to buy in into the benefits. And unfortunately, and this is an academic point, this is not so much about anything. Unfortunately, one of the problems of diversity and inclusion is that it 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 asks you to focus on specific groups, uh, and it does so because you assume difference of thinking because of differentiated experience and profile and gender and anything. But the true diversity is in a group of people throwing 10 different ideas, regardless of their gender, race, caste, creed, schooling, experience, uh, all of that, all the dimensions of diversity. If you create that condition, everybody will be able to thrive. I'm going to stop. Sorry, Nishita, I
no,
interrupted
no,
you.
no. It is very important. I was just reflecting back on my banking career, and we used to take some of the points that you mentioned into account at recruitment, not necessarily for getting great ideas, but for preventing fraud.
Hmm.
Because if too many people come from the same city, village, school, university, and they have a potential to collude, then there is a potential for a fraud. So it was a risk mitigation kind of an effort to diversify the candidate base rather than get great
Brilliant.
ideas. So yeah, there are different ways of kind of looking at the same problem. And uh, towards the kind of end of this show, if you could talk to us about what you think about the potential roadblocks or challenges that could prevent the implementation of a great culture plan, great EVP experience, what should organizations watch out for in their journey towards great experiences?
So execution, and you said it when you gave the 70-20-10 example, that 70% of time goes in whatever, thinking, 20% in talking, and 10% in executing. uh, I think it's really important not to get it perfect at first go. Let it be imperfect. Let it be a little messy. Uh, Iterate, because you learn. Don't make it programmatic. Don't get very expensive and all cutesy about it. You are improving the ways of working. It's improving ways of working, my friend, is very unglamorous,
Mm,
right? There is no glamour in it. Culture is very glamorous. Talking about culture is very glamorous, but trying to look at what are your top 10 processes that is coming in the way of effectiveness, it's an unglamorous job to do, right? Like, it's finding out, going and seeing what can be done differently, what are the risks of that, can we do it, what is the cost of that, right? Simple decision matrix, processes, that bit. And then some of the rubber hitting the road on things like inclusion. Are you well represented? What will it take you to get well represented? uh, can you absorb that in your pace? Can you absorb that? Like, can you wait? Like, a lot of people do that. In India, at least, it's legally done. In some of the other markets, you can't do that because you can't create a positive discrimination as well in your recruitment process. You know this.
mm,
So if you're talking about a hiring, how do I sort of balance and let's just take India as an example. How do you balance the need for speed with thoughtful hiring, diverse hiring? You know, those are messy discussions. It it is a thoughtful, messy discussion, right? So, to me, the doing part is unglamorous, but that's where we all should spend our time. And I think that's the challenge. The execution challenge is, uh, for anything, whether it's strategy, whether it is a good digital program, or whether it is a good culture program. It is just the execution of it that sort of defeats it. And execution is dependent on people. And people do stuff when you communicate right. So for me, it's like a circular loop. I don't think we are doing rocket science. We are just trying to improve ways of working, culture, and all of that. So it's not like rocket science. People can do it. The people we have can absolutely do it. It's just about communication, communicating it right, and getting the right execution.
so I've kind of heard the Shuchika I know from before. Solid, process oriented, quick wins, don't try to disrupt the whole world in one day. Get small steps, iterate fast, iterate quickly, and don't expect a perfect solution at the first instance. Shuchika, it was amazing talking to you, and especially
Yeah.
listening to your views around culture and diversity and inclusion. Because sometimes when it comes to discussions like experience, people tend to take a more hard view of things, like let's get a nice shiny app, let's get uh, a fancy communication done, and let's just claim credit for things that have not yet been implemented. But I think you're on a very solid path. It may take time and it may take a lot more effort, but I'm sure in the long run the results that you will see will be there for everyone to actually see. So it was amazing getting your insights on how things are done. We'll share this conversation with our audiences, and then if there are any questions directed at you, we will pass those on, and then we can get back to our audiences on their queries.
Thank you, Rishabh.